Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming to my talk. My name is Jingyang Wang. I am a PhD candidate supervised by Professor Gerben Cedar from University of California, Berkeley and Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. Today, my topic is the interplay between thermodynamics and kinetics in the solid-state synthesis of layered oxide. The emergence of computational material science is speeding up materials research by inverting the traditional way of material discovery. Today, we are able to use density functional theory to design and predict the material structure according to certain technological needs, which provides a target material prior to any experimental effort. However, knowing what to synthesize does not equal to knowing how to synthesize it. Especially compounds predicted as thermodynamic stable sometimes cannot be made experimentally. Some metastable phases are often observed during the material formation. So a predictive theory of material synthesis becomes an important yet missing part to close this loop in the computational material design process. When approaching material synthesis, thermodynamic phase diagram is often a starting point. What we usually do is prepare the precursor at a composition where a desired phase is stable and obtain it by holding the system under appropriate thermodynamic conditions for sufficiently long time. But the phase diagram can be unreliable when kinetics plays a role. Several in situ studies have already shown that the path towards the target phase often proceeds through multiple non-equilibrium intermediates. The long-lived metastable intermediates can either persist as impurity phases or it can structurally template the phase transformation pathway. Therefore, a guiding principle to rationalize the formation of metastable intermediates is a crucial part to understand the material synthesis. In this work, we systematically studied the solid-state synthesis of sodium layered oxides because technologically they are important sodium ion cathode material and they have multiple phases of similar structure and composition, which makes it a perfect system to demonstrate the complicated phase formation pathway. Taking sodium cobalt oxide as an example, there are two major polytypes which can be distinguished by their oxygen stacking and sodium environment. On the left is P2 phase with a two-layer oxygen stacking, ABBA. And on the right are three-layer phases, P3, O3 prime, and O3 with a three-layer oxygen stacking sequence. And a prime symbol here represents the symmetry breaking either by sodium ordering or Young-Taylor distortion. Electrochemical properties such as sodium mobility and cycle stability are highly dependent on the structure of layer phases. For example, P2 phases usually have excellent sodium ion conductivity, therefore good rate capability. The three-layer phases can easily transform into each other through layer shifting, which may lead to multi-phase transformation and battery degradation during cycling. The thermodynamic stability of different layer phases varies with sodium content. The DFT calculation shows that the O3 phase is the lowest energy phase at high sodiation. Meanwhile, at sodium 2/3, P2 phase is the ground state. So thermodynamic consideration implies that at sodium 2/3, P2 should be the equilibrium phase at low temperature. However, the experimental observation is in apparent contradiction. This figure summarizes the synthesis result for different sodium cobalt oxide polytypes. At sodium 2/3, P2 can only be obtained at high temperature, and at low temperature, P3 and O3 prime can be synthesized. So here comes the question, why are metastable phases forming at low temperature instead of P2? To understand this problem, we first use in situ synchrotron X-ray diffraction to monitor the solid-state synthesis process. We then rationalize our findings using an exponential thermodynamic framework. And the in situ setups basically contains a high temperature furnace which is placed under the X-ray. So as the sample being heated up, we can obtain a series of X-ray diffraction pattern in real time. And the high energy synchrotron X-ray can achieve a time resolution of 1 scan per minute, which should be sufficient for typical solid-state reactions. The in situ experiment was performed with a precursor mixture of sodium peroxide and cobalt oxide that is targeting at P2 sodium 2/3 cobalt O2. The temperature profile is shown on the left. The whole reaction takes about 200 minutes, and we highlight the first 30 minutes because that's where most reaction happens. X-ray diffraction was pattern are plotted in a contour style to better demonstrate the diffraction peak evolution. In general, we found that before reaching to the ground state P2, the sodium cobalt oxide system undergoes a series of phase transformations through several metastable intermediates. At the beginning, O3 forms first from cobalt oxide at low temperature. It then transforms into O3 prime and P3. P2 phase can only be obtained at above 850 degrees C. To quantify the phase evolution, we performed a sequential radial refinement, and this figure shows the molar ratio of each crystalline phases as a function of time. In general, the whole reaction path can be divided into two parts. The quick transformation with the non-equilibrium three-layer phases in the first 30 minutes, and then the slow reaction to the equilibrium two-layer phases. At the beginning of the reaction, only cobalt oxide can be observed, which are represented by those blue dots because sodium peroxide are amorphized during ball milling. Around 7 minutes, O3 sodium 1 cobalt oxide starts to form, and the formation of O3 is extremely fast for solid-state reaction. Almost within 1 scan, the molar ratio of O3 increases from 0 up to 70%, leaving around 30% of cobalt oxide unreacted. At around 600 degrees C, O3 gradually disappears and O3 prime shows up. The sodium occupancy of O3 prime is lower than O3, which means more cobalt oxide is consumed and incorporated into the layer structure. O3 prime only exists for a short period of time. It then quickly transforms into P3. At 850 degrees C, P3 slowly transforms into our target P2 phase. This is so far the slowest reaction. So we further increases the temperature, and finally a pure P2 phase is obtained at 1050 degrees C. So even we prepare the precursor at sodium 2/3 composition, the first phase to form was O3 with full sodium occupancy, and our target P2 phase with the right composition only forms after 30 minutes and grows very slowly. To understand the thermodynamic evolution of the system, we then calculate the ground free energy of the entire reaction vessel as a function of time, accounting for open boundary condition with respect to oxygen. Each point in this bottom figure are calculated based on DFT calculated energy and experimental phase fraction in the top figure. This energy cascade shows that nearly all of the reaction energy are consumed in the first 30 minutes. Specifically, around 85% of the reaction energy is consumed into the formation of O3, leaving only less than 2% available for the transformation from P3 to P2. So the fast transformation of the non-equilibrium three-layer phases are actually thermodynamically driven by the large reaction driving force. And as we mentioned in the introduction part, the transformation within those non-equilibrium intermediates are easy to achieve. O3 prime is a monoclinic distorted O3 associated with sodium iodine, and a P3 can be formed from O3 prime by displacive layer shifting. On the other hand, deriving P2 phase from a three-layer phase has a large energy barrier, and as there is so little driving force remaining at this time, higher temperature is required to accelerate the reaction kinetics. The important message here is the early formation of O3 phase consume a significant amount of reaction energy, and as the sodium content keep decreasing to the target composition, O3 phase seems to bias the reaction pathway towards kinetically favored O3' and P3 instead of forming the ground state P2 directly. Why the first form phase is O3? We can consider that solid-state reaction between powder precursor initiate at the particle interfaces. Assuming we have a mixture of A and B particles, and the ratio between A and B is 1 to 2. If we want to find the phase that most likely to form in this AB binary system, usually we look at the composition AB2, then pick up the phase with the lowest energy. However, this is not what we have observed, otherwise P2 will form directly. At the initial stage of solid-state synthesis, the reaction happens at the particle interface. Since the diffusion in solids are so slow, locally powder precursor does not know the global composition of the entire reaction vessel. In this case, we are actually at a compositionally unconstrained boundary condition. The first phase to form, therefore, does not have to be at the same composition as the precursor. So we should look at all possible composition along this AB tie line and pick up the deepest point in the convex hull. Similar in our layered oxide system, though the precursor composition is sodium 2/3, locally at the interface, the first phase to form can have any sodium content that offers the most negative reaction energy. According to this reaction equation between sodium peroxide and cobalt oxide, we calculated the reaction energies and plotted as a function of sodium content X. At each value of X, reaction energies are calculated at both 600 and 800 K. Under this condition, the fully sodiated sodium 1 cobalt oxide always has the most negative reaction energy, therefore the largest driving force to form. Besides, the ground state polymorph at sodium 1, if you could remember, is the O3 phase. Therefore, O3 phase forms first in the reaction. This also indicates that the structural selection is governed by the composition selection because the energy difference between different layer phases are so small, usually a few MeV, compared to the reaction energy difference between different compositions. So the whole reaction path is actually determined by the convolution of both thermodynamics and kinetics. First, at cobalt oxide and sodium peroxide interface, the first form O3 phase maximize the reaction energy. As a result, its formation also consumes a large amount of thermodynamic driving force. With TEM, we can get a sense of how the interfacial reaction looks like. This figure shows a pristine mixture of cobalt oxide and sodium peroxide after ball milling. And this set of figures shows the same precursor briefly annealed at a low temperature for a short period of time. As the reaction starts, sodium peroxide diffuses into cobalt oxide particle, therefore lead to a co-shell-like morphology where the remaining cobalt oxide is capsulated by the O3 phase. Next, as there is still excess cobalt oxide remaining, it keeps reacting with the O3 shell towards the global composition, but it does not go directly to the ground state P2 because the first formed O3 phase templates the pathway towards kinetically favored O3' and P3. Finally, with high temperature to overcome the barrier between 3-layer phases and 2-layer phase, P2 starts to form. This transition can be explained and fitted by a nucleation growth saturation model. This S-shaped behavior further confirms that P3 to P2 transition is indeed a metastable to stable transformation driven by crystallization kinetics. To validate our hypothesis of the interfacial reaction model, we further investigated the sodium manganese oxide system. The reaction energy were calculated with two sets of precursor. One is manganese 2O3 with sodium peroxide and the other with sodium carbonate. Similar to the cobalt system, the first formed phase between peroxide and manganese 2O3 is predicted to be a fully sodiated O phase. However, sodium carbonate reacts differently with manganese 2O3. In this case, a sodium deficient state a sodium deficient P3 phase is clearly favored. The corresponding ester diffraction pattern indeed shows that with sodium peroxide, the first formed phase is a fully sodiated O phase, while with sodium carbonate, the first formed phase becomes a sodium deficient P3 phase. This experiment demonstrates that by selecting different precursors, we can actually control the first phase to form, therefore control the phase reaction sequence. In conclusion, by combining in situ synchrotron X-ray diffraction and evidential thermodynamics, we first define a new reaction model that the interfacial reaction with maximum energy lowering in the compositionally unconstrained chemical space determine the first phase to form, which also rationalize the formation of metastable intermediates. And as changing the precursor can change the first formed phase, the material formation pathway can also be tuned by selecting different precursors. In the end, we show thermodynamics and kinetics are highly convoluted during the materials formation, and we hope our understanding can further facilitate the theory of predictive synthesis of inorganic material and accelerate the material discovery in a more efficient way. As for the acknowledgement, I want to thanks to my advisor, Professor Gerbrand Sider, who initiate and supervise the whole project. And special thanks to my collaborator and former Sider group member, Dr. Matteo Bianchini and Professor Wenhao Sang. Also thanks to other collaborator and co-author of this paper from UC Berkeley, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, Brookhaven National Lab, UC Santa Barbara, Samsung, and Lawrence Livermore National Lab. And thanks for your attention.